Hey everyone, Igor Paspalj here, and as we all know, Deskew company recently updated Gig Performer to version 5, and now it's really better than ever. Now we have some amazing new features such as GP relayer, envelope follower, song part automation, MIDI rechannelizer, chord maker, etc. But what I really want to talk about today is something that's still seems to be concern for a lot of people, and I will try to explain why it's not really an issue, and that's latency. Now, latency thing is not strictly connected to Gig Performer software. It's rather a problem people bring up with any digital gear, software, VST plugins, and performing and making music over computer in general. Now, I'm not young anymore, but I guess I still belong to the generation of musicians who are raised and who based most of their careers using pretty much only digital gear and computers, in both studio and live work. So, to go back a little bit, among us guitarists, and I'm going to base this talk on guitar players since I'm one of them, so there's still a large community of, real amp lovers, tube amp guys, analog people, or whatever you want to call it. And it's always, ongoing and never-ending debate. First, about the difference in feel, sound, so-called amp in the room, feel and sound, and general differences between real tube amps and digital modelers or profilers or VST plugins. And if I'm being honest, it was a pretty big difference some 25, 30 years ago. I remember first digital guitar processor and first VST guitar plugins that hit the market, and I pretty much owned almost every single one that mattered at the time, since I've started playing some 30 years ago. And at first, they really weren't very good. Algorithms in most of these devices weren't very good. Processing power, of both these units and computers was very humble, and sound and feel couldn't even compare to some decent tube amp. But now, in the last 10 or 15 years, digital technology really caught up with that. And now, actually, in this present time, it's actually hard to find a piece of gear, even cheaper ones, that doesn't give you pretty good sound and feel. And most high-end units and plugins, there's virtually no difference in sound and feel anymore, between digital and analog gear. So we are seeing more and more people these days convert to digital gear for that very reason, as well as for other reasons, such as flexibility, smaller size factor, ease of transportation, versatility, etc. And now we get to latency. So something a lot of people are still scared of when using digital gear, but it's really not a matter for concern. So, first, what's latency? It's simply the amount of time that passes between the sound being generated and perceived by your brain. So basically, it's a delay. So if you take some simple math, so sound travels by speed of 1,000 feet per second. So if you're positioned 10 feet from the speaker, you'll get a latency of 10 milliseconds. So even with analog tube amp, you will always perceive some latency depending how far you are away from the amp speaker. So the real question is, how much latency is acceptable before you really start feeling that slight delay and before it actually starts bothers you and limit your performance in some way? Some people claim they can feel much more latency through digital modeling processor, for example, rather than their tube amp. But I think it's mostly in their head, really, because let's take an example of a person who plays his tube amp at a distance of 10 feet from the speaker, and he claims that he doesn't feel latency comparing to VST plugin he's playing through the headphones of his computer. Well, one can claim whatever he wants, but science and sound physics will prove them wrong. So if one plays that plugin that I just mentioned through decent computer and sound interface, that gives him round-trip latency of, let's say, 5 milliseconds. And now don't forget, with headphones on his ears, it's going to be 5 milliseconds in total, since headphones are directly in your ears. So there's no time for the sound to travel. It's directly there. So it's still 2 times less than tube amp when you position 10 feet away from the speaker. Even if we assume that tube amp has 0-second latency at the speaker source. Now, for me personally, everything below 8 milliseconds is perfectly fine. I've been experimenting with it for decades, and I play very fast most of the times. And really, there's no difference, assuming you're positioned fairly close to the speakers. as most of us are in our studios. Now, 8 to 12 milliseconds for me is still acceptable, and in some cases, I can get away with up to 15, although I never needed to, at least in my studio work. Now, everything above 15 milliseconds for me is unacceptable, or at least I can really feel it's not good. I don't feel very comfortable playing, especially in studio. Luckily, with today's computers and sound interfaces, it's not hard or expensive anymore to achieve that round-trip latency below 10 milliseconds, and even much lower. I personally record everything in my studio with round-trip latency of around 3.6 milliseconds without any studio issues or artifacts whatsoever. Okay, so without further boring technical talk, let me demonstrate you how that works in Gig Performer 5. By the way, I'm gonna leave a link in the description of this video to a great and detailed article about latency and why it's not really an issue if you are interested to learn more. Here I have open Gig Performer, and first let me tell you what I'm gonna be using here. I'm basically gonna use the same template that comes, stock when you purchase Gig Performer, and it's still one of my favorite templates, is this one, electric guitar with Master FX. Because it has a really great guitar sound straight off the box, it has an audio player in it and everything, and the only little thing that I've changed basically, I'm just gonna show you, I'm just gonna open my version of it. So it's basically exactly the same template. Only thing what I changed is I added this GP Relayer, that new feature from Gig Performer 5, which basically just allows me to record everything that's happening in Gig Performer right here, as you can see in my DAW, in the Logic Pro. Right now, let me show you. I have my latency in Gig Performer, set it up to 32 samples. Now it says here 0.7 milliseconds. Basically 32 buffer size sample gives you around 3.6 milliseconds round trip latency. I'm using, my setup is Apple Twin, Thunderbolt audio interface, and Mac Studio computer Max with 32 gigs of RAM. I don't know, 19 cores, whatever, so pretty powerful computer. But anyway, I tried it, on my wife's laptop, for example, which has a basic, M1 Air MacBook with 8 gigs of RAM, something, and everything still works perfectly. And I've literally... Now, there's literally, you cannot feel any latency at all, and I'm very close to my studio monitors, and 3.6 millisecond round trip is really nothing, you cannot really feel anything at all. So for example, let me show you, I'm gonna go to audio player, and I'm gonna load in one of my, tracks here. I'm gonna load it here, okay. And let me try to play something for you. So basically, this audio player is also very handy. You have it included in this template also. And I'm just going to play the track and guitar with it. So let's see what's going to happen. This is, one of my songs. And let's see. And so on. So literally, there's no latency at all. So you really shouldn't be, scared about it. So that was the lowest buffer size. Actually, Gig Performer goes even lower. I think it can go even to 16 samples. But I'm just using, for example, samples that I can set it up in my Logic when I'm recording, regardless of using a Gig Performer. So basically, Logic goes by, with lowest 32, then 64, then 128, 256, and 512. Here, as you can see, you have some mid options as well. But anyway, literally, there's absolutely not a problem playing any of the stuff, even the very fast ones. So if I try this on 64 samples, same thing. There's going to be, again, it says here 1.3 milliseconds. The round trip on 64 samples would be around 5 milliseconds. So, let's just apply settings. And I don't think still you can, you're going to... Still cannot feel a thing, even if you try with a track. Again, let's see. Still, absolutely, you wouldn't feel a thing. It's worth mentioning that, of course, you need to have a decent computer, decent sound interface. But again, as I mentioned, before, really, any solid, computer and sound interface, even the cheaper ones, will give you that possibility, of low latency. If I go to my audio setup and let's try, I think, even 128 millisecond, which is basically, it's gonna not give a lot of stress to your computer. So, 128 samples, buffer size. That round trip would be 7.6 millisecond. Still, you probably won't be able to feel it at all. And it's going to really take off a lot of stress, from your computer, from your processing power. So it's going to allow a lot more plugins and tracks to be loaded at the same time. And if I apply this setting, let's see what's going to happen. Still cannot feel a thing. Try one more time with the same track. And so on and so on. So yeah, really, still very good, and still your processing power, your computer is going to be thankful to you for, using larger buffer size, not too much stress on your cores. And still, even on 256, which is going to really make your computer work easy, it's still going to be possible. It's 13 millisecond round trip, and that's basically, in my opinion, at least for me, that's kind of a limit. So if let's try again the same track, audio player to play with that buffer size, and let's see what's gonna happen. It is something. Still pretty good. I mean, still. Guitar is going a little bit out of tune, just put the fresh strings. Still very good. That's basically the limit for me. If we go to this 512, which, you know, sometimes I use it if I have a big, large orchestra template, I put my computer to 512 just for the sake of mixing. So when I'm done with recording, I do this. So 512 milliseconds sample size. And yes, then I can really feel that would be around 23 milliseconds round trip, and that is a little bit too much. So, you know, if I don't, you cannot probably see it that well on the video, but yeah, it's, for me, is unusable. I can just feel the slight, you know, delay, and, you know, it just doesn't work for me. So I don't even have to try, you know, with a track or something. It's just not that good. There's also, you know, a latency measurement tool built in Gig Performer 5, and it's going to give you the real-time latency, you know, real measured latency, not promised by car manufacturer or whatever. But, you know, I tried this. I also have here, you know, IK Multimedia XIO sound card, you know, which is USB sound card, a lot cheaper than this Universal Audio Apollo Twin. And sometimes I take it, you know, we take it with my laptop, which is old MacBook Pro 2015. Take it, you know, on the road for recording. It's still, you know, it still works, still giving me like latency of 3 to 5 milliseconds round trip. So yeah, it's great. And it's also, you know, worth mentioning, you know, changing presets, going between these rack spaces, these different, you know, guitar sounds and stuff. Like you said, you see here. It's also, you won't feel any latency at all. Actually, it even, you know, it gets even better job by, you know, switching different plugins and different presets than some hardware, you know, some pretty expensive guitar processors. I won't name them, so guitarists will probably know, which have, for example, sometimes a little gap, you know, few milliseconds, few milliseconds too much, you know, between when you change the presets, for example, when you're going from clean to drive. So here, for example, I just turned on this MIDI Captain. You can see here, it's one little handy MIDI controller, which, for example, is changing these rack spaces here. As you can see here on the screen, actually it doesn't go all the way out, only these four, yeah, sorry. These four are set it up. So you see, real time, not single gap. You know, between changing presets, or, you know, there's no dropout, there's no, you know, any click or anything, you know, the signal. You can hear it. So, another very cool thing about Gig Performer 5 is basically the fact that you don't need a physical MIDI controller at all. And what I'm talking about here is this very cool feature that's called Streaming Audio File Player. And I just replaced this previous player that I used, you know, to test the latency thing prior to this. And if you open it, you can load here a bunch of audio files, you know. In this particular case, I loaded my that same tune of mine, Full Throttle, that you heard a few times before. And it has this such a cool marker thing, which is basically feature that you can put marker anywhere in this waveform, anywhere that you like, markers. And basically every marker, when you go to marker list view, you can call to action. So basically what I'm doing, what I'm interested more, I'm changing presets or rack spaces in this particular case. So I'm going to play you now again the Full Throttle. And what I did, I started with, you know, this little intro. I'm just going to use, you know, classic overdrive distortion. Then from marker 2, I'm going to switch to phaser. Then, when I come to marker 3, I'm going to switch to lead distortion without phaser, and so on. And you will see all these changes in real time when I start the track here, how it's changing rec spaces in real time. So no latency at all between changing rec spaces. There's no pops, there's no clicks, there's nothing weird happening, which is so amazing, and it's such a great feature, especially for us who like to play with the backing tracks. I'm just gonna try to play one more time, and pay attention to the left part corner. When the Gig Performer 5 is automatically gonna change the presets, I programmed it on these little markers. And so on. As you could see, all changes happened, without any lag, without any pops and clicks, and it's so great, it's so great, especially, for example, for solo guitarists like me, who performs his own songs, usually without the band, because, money can be the issue for promoters and stuff to pay the whole band. It's so great stuff. You don't have to think about changing presets. You don't have to think about the MIDI controller, what pedal you're gonna press. Less cables, less devices. You can program everything and, just focus on your playing. So amazing, amazing, amazing feature. And, adding marker, is so simple, basically wherever you go with this playhead, okay, so you just click this, add marker. When you add marker, you go to action, insert new action, and what I'm most interested in is switch to rec space. You click switch to rec space and select the rec space, and it's going to show you all the rec spaces that you created previously, in your template. You just take whatever you want, then you select variation, whichever you want, save, and when the playhead comes to that marker, it's going to switch to that particular preset or rec space, or call it whatever you want. So such a great feature, absolutely amazing. And of course, any MIDI controller will work. So great, great for live use. And that would be basically it. So again, thank you for watching, and don't be afraid of latency. Cheers and see you soon.